The folder smelled like bleach and something sweet underneath it, the way hospital gift shops always do. I was 31 years old, standing in the oncology waiting room of Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee and pretending I was fine. My mother-in-law was not pretending. She had never pretended a day in her life. "You look tired," she said, not the way people say it when they feel sorry for you. The way she said it meant something else. It meant you are not enough, and everyone in this room can see it. My father-in-law had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer 6 weeks earlier. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was legally on that Tuesday in March, had flown back to Atlanta from Chicago the day we got the call. I had driven down from our apartment in Nashville 2 days later after I'd arranged coverage for my classroom, because I was a third-grade teacher and 22 children needed someone to show up for them, even when I didn't want to show up for anything. His family had never quite forgiven me for that 2-day gap. His name was not important. What was important was that he had grown up in a house where his mother was the sun and everything else orbited around her, and he had never once questioned the arrangement. His father was a quiet, decent man who had spent 40 years doing whatever kept the peace. His sister, 2 years older, sharper at the edges, had learned to do the same. And then there was me, the wife who asked questions, the wife who had her own opinions about Thanksgiving and Christmas, and where we were going to put the sectional sofa, the wife who was, as my mother-in-law once told her book club, a lot. I had overheard that. I was meant to. The weeks at the hospital fell into a rhythm I hadn't chosen. I would drive up from Nashville on Thursday evening, stay through Sunday, sleep in the guest room of their house in Buckhead, cook meals no one thanked me for, sit in waiting rooms reading the same 3 pages of the same novel over and over while my mother-in-law held court with the nurses and my husband held his father's hand and I tried to figure out what my role was supposed to be. His father liked me. He used to joke that I was the only person in the family who ever told him when he had spinach in his teeth. That spring, sick and tired and 30 pounds lighter than the man I'd met at our wedding 5 years earlier, he would sometimes catch my eye across the room and give me a small nod, like he was trying to tell me something he couldn't say out loud. I didn't understand what it meant until much later. His father passed on a Saturday morning in late April, just after 6 a.m., with the windows open and a cardinal sitting on the sill outside like something out of a greeting card. I was in the kitchen when it happened. I had gotten up early to make coffee because I couldn't sleep, and his sister came in 20 minutes later to tell me, and the way she looked at me, like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house, was the first clear sign of what was coming. The funeral was on a Wednesday. My husband's family descended from 3 states, aunts and cousins and old college friends of his parents, and I moved through the reception in our black dress, our house, our kitchen, refilling serving platters and accepting condolences and saying, "Thank you for coming," until the words stopped meaning anything. My husband stood in the living room the entire afternoon with his arm around his mother's shoulders and did not once look across the room to check on me. That was the second sign. The will reading was 2 weeks later at the office of his father's estate attorney downtown. I had expected it to feel formal and somber, the way these things do in movies. Instead, it felt like standing in a room where everyone already knew the punchline, and I was the only one who hadn't heard it yet. His father had been, quietly and without any announcement, a careful man. He had built a small real estate portfolio over 40 years, 3 rental properties in Atlanta, a vacation cabin up near Blue Ridge, and a piece of commercial land in Gwinnett County that had doubled in value in the last decade. He had also, at some point in the last year of his life, revised his will. The revision included me, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that cut anyone out or rewrote any relationships. He had simply added a specific bequest, The Blue Ridge cabin, which had been his family since before my husband was born, was left jointly to my husband and to me as a couple, with a provision that if the marriage dissolved within 5 years of his death, my share would transfer to a charitable trust of my choosing rather than revert to the family. It was a small thing, a cabin, maybe $200,000 of real estate in the North Georgia mountains, nothing that would change anyone's life. But the way the room went still when the attorney read that paragraph told me everything I needed to know. My mother-in-law's hands, folded in her lap, tightened. Her knuckles went white. My husband did not look at me. His sister made a sound very soft that was not quite a word. I sat with my own hands loose in my lap and looked at the attorney and tried to keep my face neutral and thought, so that's what he was trying to tell me. The drive home from downtown was 22 minutes. My husband didn't speak for the first 15 of them. I watched the city go by outside the window, the Beltline Trail, the old brick warehouses, the new glass towers going up everywhere, and waited. "That was unexpected," he finally said. "It was," I said. "My mother is upset." "I know." "She thinks Dad must have been. She thinks maybe he wasn't thinking clearly at the end." I turned to look at him then. His jaw was tight. He was staring at the road. "Your father," I said carefully, "was the clearest thinker in that room until the day he died." My husband didn't answer. That night, his mother called. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen, the low, careful voice he used when he was agreeing with her about something he didn't want me to know he was agreeing with. I washed the dinner dishes and listened to the cadence of it. "Yes, Mom. I know, Mom. I understand." And I thought about the way his father used to nod at me across hospital waiting rooms. The next morning, I drove back to Nashville. Over the following 3 weeks, my husband came home twice. Both times, he was quiet and preoccupied and on his phone constantly, and both times when I tried to talk to him about anything, the cabin, his mother, how he was doing with the grief, he said he was tired and he'd talk to me about it later. Later never came. The third week, on a Friday evening, he came home with his sister. I hadn't been told she was coming. I was in yoga pants and a Nashville FC t-shirt, eating leftover pasta over the sink, when they walked in together. His sister looked around our apartment the way people look at things they're calculating the value of. "We need to talk," my husband said. We sat in the living room. His sister sat on the armchair, my armchair, the one I'd had since graduate school, and crossed her legs and looked at me with the expression of someone who has prepared remarks. "The cabin was always supposed to stay in the family," she said. "I understand that's how your mother feels," I said. "It's how the whole family feels." "Your father didn't." The silence after that was its own kind of sentence. My husband was staring at the rug. He had a way of going absent in his own body when things got uncomfortable, a skill he had developed over a lifetime of living with his mother, and he was using it now in a way that made me feel like I was watching something essential drain out of him. "We think," his sister said, "that the fairest thing would be for you to sign a quitclaim deed transferring your interest in the property back to the family." "Given the circumstances." "Given the circumstances," I repeated. It was an oversight. Or Dad was emotional at the end. He wasn't himself. "He was completely himself," I said. "I was there. You weren't." Her eyes narrowed. "This is already a hard time for everyone," she said. "We'd appreciate you not making it harder." I looked at my husband. He was still looking at the rug. "Are you going to say anything?" I asked him. He looked up. His expression was something I didn't have a name for, not quite guilt, not quite resolve. Somewhere between the two, in the territory of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for the other person to catch up. "I think," he said slowly, "that it would mean a lot to my family. And I think Dad would have wanted." "Don't," I said. "Don't tell me what your father would have wanted. You know that's not true." He looked back at the rug. I stood up. "I'm going to need some time to think about this." Of course, his sister said, like I'd agreed to something. They left an hour later. I sat on the couch in the apartment that suddenly felt like someone else's furniture and listened to the city outside and thought about my father-in-law making small, careful changes to a legal document in the last year of his life, knowing what his family was like, knowing what might happen, leaving me the one thing he could. I didn't call anyone that night, I just sat with it. The call I did make the next morning was to the estate attorney. Her name was not on the family's approved list of people. She was a woman I had found on my own, 3 days after the will reading, because I believe in understanding documents before anyone starts pressuring me about them. Her office was in Midtown Atlanta. She was 62 years old, had been practicing estate law for 30 years, and had the energy of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not surprised by any of them. "Walk me through what they asked you to do," she said. I walked her through it. She was quiet for a moment. "Did they present anything in writing?" "Not yet." "Don't sign anything," she said. "Not one word. And the next time they bring it up, you tell them your attorney needs to review any proposed documents first. They're going to say I'm being difficult." "You are being difficult," she said pleasantly. "That's exactly what you should be doing." I went back to Nashville that afternoon. I taught my class on Monday 22 8-year-olds who needed someone to explain long division and read aloud to them after lunch and notice when Jalen was having a hard day, and I came home to my apartment and cooked dinner for one and thought about what I actually wanted. I want to be honest about this part because it's the part that gets left out of stories like this. It wasn't clean. I still loved my husband, or I loved the version of him I had believed in, and grief is not a straight line, and I spent a week eating cereal for dinner and watching mediocre television and feeling genuinely sorry for myself before I was ready to think clearly. What I thought clearly, eventually, was this. The man I'd married had sat in my living room while his sister asked me to give up something his father had specifically chosen to leave me, and he had stared at the rug. That wasn't grief. That was a choice. My husband called on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the living room conversation. His voice had the careful quality it always got when he had been coached. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "Okay," I said. "I think." He paused. "I think we want different things. I think we've been wanting different things for a while. And I think the stuff with the cabin has made it clear that we have different values when it comes to family." I was sitting on the floor of my classroom, actually, going through a box of construction paper. It was 6:30 in the evening, and the building was quiet, and the fluorescent lights were doing that thing they do when everyone has gone home. "Are you asking for a divorce?" I said. Another pause. "I think that might be the honest thing." I set down the construction paper. Outside my classroom window, I could see the parking lot, my car alone in it, the street lights just starting to come on. "Okay," I said. I expected more." "What did you expect?" He didn't answer. "Did your mother suggest this call?" I asked. "That's not fair." "Okay," I said again. We stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes, and it went nowhere, the way those conversations do, going in circles around the same few facts. And eventually I said I needed to go, and I hung up and sat on the floor of my classroom for a little while longer before I turned off the lights and went home. I called my attorney in the morning. What followed was not cinematic. Divorce never is. It is mostly paperwork and waiting and emails from attorneys and conversations about who gets which piece of furniture and whether the Nashville apartment, which was in both our names, would be sold or if one of us would buy the other out. The cabin became the central issue immediately. His family wanted me to walk away from it in the settlement. Their attorney's first offer included a cash payment, not a large one, in exchange for a full quitclaim. My attorney read me that offer over the phone in the flat voice people use when they're trying not to editorialize. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to think about what my father-in-law wanted," I said. I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about a quiet man who had nodded at me across hospital waiting rooms, who had revised his will carefully and deliberately, knowing exactly what his family was capable of, who had structured the bequest with a provision specifically designed to prevent them from getting it back through pressure. He hadn't left me the cabin because it was valuable. He had left it to me because he knew they would try to take it, and he wanted there to be something they couldn't have. The charitable trust provision wasn't an accident. It was a message. I countered, "I would keep my full interest in the cabin. I would not sign a quitclaim. I would accept a standard, equitable division of our marital assets. The apartment proceeds split 50-50, our joint accounts divided, his 401k, and my 403b, each kept by their owner." His family was not happy. His sister sent me a text that I did not respond to. His mother called my mother, which was a tactical error, because my mother is a retired school principal from Savannah, and she has a particular voice she uses on people who call her to complain about her daughter. My husband, to his credit, eventually agreed. I think he was tired. I think some part of him, the part that had looked up from the rug and then looked back down again, understood. The divorce was finalized on a Friday afternoon. I was in Atlanta for the signing, and afterward I drove north on I-400, past the sprawl of the suburbs thinning out and the hills going green and blue in the distance, up into the mountains. The cabin was at the end of a gravel road set back in the trees, with a screened porch and a fireplace and a view of the ridge that went purple in the evening. The key was under a loose stone to the left of the bottom step, which I knew because my father-in-law had shown me once, years ago, on a weekend trip when his family was still pretending we all got along. I let myself in. It smelled like cedar and a little bit of dust and something underneath both of those things that I couldn't name. The particular smell of a place that has been loved for a long time. I sat down on the porch and watched the light change on the ridge, and didn't think about anything in particular. A hawk turned slow circles over the tree line. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and stopped. The mountains did what mountains do. They made everything else very small. I had my phone with me. I had 17 unread text messages, 2 missed calls from my mother, and 1 email from my attorney confirming the final transfer of the deed. I read the email. I put the phone face down on the porch railing. And I thought, he knew exactly what he was doing. I stayed 2 nights. I swept out the dust, opened the windows, found half a cord of split wood stacked under a tarp at the side of the cabin, and built a fire on the first evening even though it wasn't cold enough to need one, just because I wanted to. I made eggs in the morning in the small kitchen and ate them on the porch with coffee and listened to the birds. On the second morning, I called my attorney to thank her. "Don't thank me," she said. "You knew what you wanted. That's most of the work." On the drive back to Nashville, I thought about what I wanted to do with it. I had some ideas, nothing dramatic. Maybe rent it out during peak season, leaf season in October, ski weekends in winter, enough to cover the property taxes and maintenance and put a little aside. Maybe go up there myself in the summers, in the quiet months, with a stack of books and no agenda. Maybe eventually something else. I was 31. There was time. I got back to Nashville at dusk, the sky going orange over the Cumberland River. I carried my bag upstairs to my apartment. Just my apartment now, which felt both lonelier and cleaner than I expected, and I made a simple dinner and sat at the table by the window and let the city go dark around me. My phone buzzed twice, both times my mother-in-law. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and left it there. Outside, the streetlights were coming on one by one down the block, the way they do in Nashville in late May, slow and golden, and I sat at the table in the window for a long time after I finished eating, watching nothing in particular, not thinking about anything I had lost, just thinking about what I still had. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the will reading, Not the phone call from my attorney. Not even the afternoon I drove up to Blue Ridge alone for the first time. It's smaller than all of those. It's my husband staring at the rug while his sister asked me to give away something his father had deliberately left me. That image, the top of his head, his jaw tight, his silence, tells me everything I need to understand about how I got there and how I got out. I used to think silence was neutral. I don't anymore. Silence, when someone you love chooses it at the exact moment you need them to speak, is its own kind of answer. And once you've heard it clearly, you can't unhear it. What carried me through wasn't anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you empty. What carried me was something steadier, the ability to look at what was actually in front of me instead of what I wished was there. My father-in-law had that quality. He was a man who saw his family clearly, loved them anyway, and still made the careful, honest decision. He didn't revise his will out of bitterness. He revised it because he understood cause and effect better than anyone in that room gave him credit for. He knew what would happen after he was gone. He prepared for it the only way he could. That's the kind of thinking I had to learn to do for myself. Not reactive, not emotional, not waiting for someone else to fix it. I had to sit with the discomfort of what was real. That my marriage had been quietly failing for longer than I'd admitted. That the people around me had made their choices, and that I had my own choice to make. I could sign the quitclaim and keep the peace that was never really peace. Or I could pick up the phone and find someone who knew what the document actually meant. I picked up the phone. That decision sounds small. It wasn't. It required me to stop apologizing for having an interest worth protecting. There's something I want to say about my father-in-law's attorney, the woman with 30 years of experience, who told me that being difficult was exactly what I should be doing. She said it pleasantly, without drama, like it was simply a fact. I think about that a lot. Because I had spent years in that family being quietly ashamed of being a lot, of having opinions, of not folding when things got uncomfortable, and here was someone telling me that the very quality they had criticized me for was, in this context, a skill. Integrity isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the floor of an empty classroom, listening to your husband explain in careful, coached language that you want different things and saying, okay, not because you're giving up, because you have already seen clearly and you are already deciding. Resilience, I've learned, is not the absence of grief. I grieved my marriage. I grieved the version of my husband I had believed in. I ate cereal for dinner and watched bad television and felt genuinely sorry for myself, and that was necessary. But grief has to move eventually, and what moves it is the quiet application of the mind, looking at what you have, what you can do, what the honest next step is. I have a cabin in the North Georgia mountains with a screened porch and a view of the ridge that goes purple in the evenings. My father-in-law showed me where the key was years before any of this happened. He was that kind of man. Careful, honest, looking ahead. I try to be that kind of person now. I don't always manage it, but I try.